The Throne of Luster by A.R. Swain. Read to you by Steve Fortune. The Lightbearer Saga, Book 1, The Throne of Luster. Prelude. The First Steps. The Hydra's blood froze as it touched the frigid air, its 3 severed heads scattered among the frost-covered foliage. Norag stumbled away from the beast's corpse, his fingers desperately searching for his staff, a relic that could mean the difference between life and death. The world around him swam, a haze of pain and exhaustion threatening to overwhelm his senses. His hand closed around the rough wood of his staff, its head forged into a waning crescent. It would seem like a simple magical relic to most, but to Norag it was the key to survival in this harsh new world. With a ragged breath, he strained an incantation, one that had once called forth the nurturing power of mana. Instead, a chaotic surge of light erupted from the staff's tip, rainbow flames leaping and twisting in ways that defied nature. Norag gritted his teeth, fighting to control this alien power that felt so different from the mana he once knew. The light was wild, untamed, a stark contrast to the gentle flow of power that had once suffused every leaf and stone in Batesian. As the glow restored warmth to his pale skin, tremors of barely contained energy rippled through him, a reminder of how little they understood this new power. He pushed himself to his feet, each movement a study in caution. The ground beneath him was slick with frost, a treacherous reminder of how the land itself had changed since the world tree's demise. Norag's eyes scanned the desolate landscape, taking in the skeletal trees and barren earth. This forest, once vibrant with life and magic, now stood as a graveyard to a lost era. As he made his way through the silent woods, the crunch of frost beneath his boots the only sound, Norag felt the absence of mana like a physical ache. He remembered a time when magic danced among these trees, its whispers ensuring harmony between the arcane and the natural world. But now, with the world tree withered and drained by the aggressive, desperate use of its power, that harmony was shattered. The scars of recent conflicts were etched into the very land. The siege of Verdemir, the war of stone and blood, the battle of the twin kings. These names ran through his mind, a grim reminder of the cost of progress, of the price paid for power. Norag's boot crunched on something that wasn't ice. He looked down to see a rusted helmet, its crest barely visible, a relic from a long time gone. The land here was a graveyard of history, each step a reminder of the bloody conflicts that had shaped Batesian. A sound like thunder rolled across the sky, and Norag instinctively ducked, seeking cover. The beat of massive wings echoed overhead. Dragons, once creatures of the highest respect and regard, now a terrifying sight in this new age of light. They had emerged from their homes afflicted by the chaos of a world in magical flux, and now they claimed dominion over these lands. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Norag became acutely aware of his injuries. Each scar was a story, a moment where he had danced with death and emerged victorious, yet not unscathed. He reached into his satchel, fingers closing around a vial that pulsed with an inner glow, beating in time with his own heart. The first lesson of any Fae echoed in his mind. Magic was life. Magic was death. This magic, however, was bound and bottled by those brave enough to wield it. With a grimace, he uncorked the vial, revealing the wounds beneath his shirt, a dark mosaic of bruises and frostbitten skin. He poured the glowing green liquid over the worst of the injuries, biting back a scream as it sizzled against his flesh. The potion, once a gentle healing embrace guided by mana, now burned like liquid fire, the final embers of mana within it raw and unrefined. As the pain subsided, movement in the distance caught Norag's eye. The rubble shifted, and for a moment he feared the Hydra had somehow survived. But as the dust settled, a familiar figure emerged. "Lenore!" he called out, his voice hoarse. She stepped forward, the weak sunlight filtering through the trees to illuminate her face. Despite the years and hardships, Lenore remained a vision of beauty, her skin a tender pink that highlighted the deep sea blue of her eyes. A small scuff on her forehead and the worried crease of her brow were the only mar to her otherwise flawless features. Lenore rushed to his side, her bag hitting the ground with a thud. "Are you injured?" she asked, her eyes scanning him with professional concern, tinged with something deeper, more personal. Norag managed a weak smile. "I was," he said, lifting his shirt to show the partially healed wound. "I used the potion you made. You didn't warn me it would hurt so much." Her eyes widened with fear as she took in the extent of his injuries. "The poison is spreading," she muttered, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have waited." Her hands, gentle yet urgent, pushed another vial towards his lips. "Please, you must drink this too." As he swallowed the potion, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond between them. Lenore knelt beside him, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the wound. "This was supposed to be easier," she murmured, more to herself than to Norag. "The death of the World Tree. I can't believe we understood so little." "I know, but we will find a way to aid them," Norag said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "The dragons almost found me after the Hydra, so we shouldn't stick around." Lenore shook her head, focusing on treating his wound. The skin around it had a distinct hue of dark purple with black veins, swollen but slowly reducing under her ministrations. "There," she said at last. "It won't kill you now, at least." "Thank you," Norag said, pulling his shirt down. "So where to now?" Lenore's focus remained on her medical equipment, her movements less sure than they once were. "We've come this far," she said, a new resolve in her voice. "The Oracle said it's nearby. We have to press on." As they continued their journey, Norag couldn't help but notice the change in Lenore. She led with a determination he hadn't seen before, a hint of desperation in her steps. Something had changed, but he didn't press her. She had lost enough already. They moved cautiously through the dying forest, each step a reminder of what had been lost. The trees, once vibrant and full of life, now stood like sentinels of a forgotten age, their bare branches reaching towards the sky in a silent plea. Norag felt a pang of guilt, a gnawing sense that he, like all Fae, bore some responsibility for the world's current state. "We should have stopped this. What have we done?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. As they emerged from the frozen wasteland into a slightly more vibrant section of the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive silence gave way to the faint rustle of leaves and distant calls of creatures fighting for survival. The air here felt charged with a subtle magic, hinting at life persisting against all odds. Through the trees, Norag spotted a group of figures moving with grace and purpose. Their armor, though dulled, still gleamed faintly in the weak sunlight. Intricate patterns etched into the metal revealed their heritage. "Leaf blood," Norag murmured, a note of reverence in his voice. These elven guardians of the forest, once deeply connected to the World Tree, were now adrift in a world without mana. Their presence was both comforting and heartbreaking. Lenore watched them, her eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "They're beautiful," she whispered, "and yet so sad. Guardians without a realm to guard." As they pressed on, following the elves' path but keeping their distance, Norag felt a kinship with these warriors. They shared a common struggle, fighting not just against physical threats, but against the loss of hope and connection in a world fundamentally changed. The forest seemed to come alive around them, the chatter of animals and whisper of wind through leaves, a symphony of resilience. Lenore reached out to touch a sapling that had sprouted through the frost-covered soil, its green leaves vibrant against the muted colours around it. "Life will find a way. It always does," she said, her fingers sliding between his. Norag nodded, his hand clenching as his eyes met hers with the knowing gaze. The challenges ahead were daunting, but the resilience of the forest, its guardians, and even his wife filled him with hope. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, Norag noticed an anomaly that drew their attention. Symbols were carved into the stone, all differing in design, letters of an unknown origin. The repetition of these symbols, deliberate and precise, punctuated the natural beauty with an undercurrent of mystery. "These symbols," Norag mused aloud, running his fingers over the cold etched stone. "They're not just markers. They're messages." Lenore leaned in closer, her curiosity piqued by the faint trace of power that seemed to whisper secrets of an ancient time. "They're telling us to follow them, but also warning us away," he continued, his tone a mix of intrigue and apprehension. Lenore's gaze met his, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. Despite the dangers, they were driven to uncover the meaning behind these cryptic signs. With cautious haste, they followed the trail of symbols. Each step forward brought them closer to the heart of the mystery enshrouded within the forest's depths. Finally, they arrived at their destination, and Lenore quickly grabbed her notebook, sketching with barely contained excitement. "It's exactly as the book described," Lenore breathed, her voice tinged with awe. Before them stood a cave, its entrance framed by weathered rock formations. The wooden doors bore a sigil, the symbol of two dragons circling one another in a dance of beauty, etched deeply into their surface. Surrounding the entrance lay shattered stone tablets, some almost unrecognizable from the ravages of time and nature. Norag stepped forward. Almost like an instinct, he raised his staff. The moon at its tip shone with a fierce blue light, and the ancient doors creaked open, revealing the darkness beyond. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The echoes of wingbeat still gnawed at his mind, a constant reminder of the dangers that pursued them. As they entered the cave, Norag's light pierced the void, revealing nothing. The emptiness was unsettling, defying their expectations of ancient relics or paintings. "Do you see anything?" Norag asked, his voice echoing in the barren chamber. "No," Lenore replied, her brow furrowed. "But strangely, I'm not sensing anything either. It's as if this place exists outside of Mana." Norag's eyes gleamed with determination tinged with apprehension. He squared his shoulders, his grip tightening on his staff. "We need to go deeper. There has to be something." Lenore hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off a sudden chill. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Perhaps there's nothing to be found. Wouldn't that be better?" Her gaze lingered on the darkness below, a silent battle waging within her. Norag gently took her hand in his. "I'm right here beside you," he assured her, his voice soft but resolute. They descended deeper into the earth, the damp air now carrying a soft scent of decay. Norag held his breath, dread in his eyes mirrored by fear in Lenore's steps. Suddenly, the darkness lifted, and more of their senses awakened to their surroundings. Symbols on the ground shone with a soft blue light, etchings of power that seemed to pulse with each step they took. The prophecies whispered by their people echoed in Norag's mind. Those before and those to come will connect. Here it lives. Before them stood an intricately carved mosaic, depicting 8 symbols, each one encircling a design reminiscent of the most sacred stained glass windows. Below the markings, strange words were etched, a language unknown to outsiders, but intimately familiar to Norag and Lenore. Lenore's eyes widened, a spark of joy igniting as she stumbled upon the sight. She fought to maintain her composure, her voice bubbling with barely contained excitement. "We found it!" she exclaimed, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "We did," Norag agreed, his voice tight with emotion. "But now the true journey begins. What does it say?" Lenore consulted her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration as she translated the ancient text. 8 powers binding, in shadow, hope, and light. Bearers of light illuminate when hope takes flight. As the sun fades and flames, their smiles shine. The throne waits for the chosen one, who will bring hope in kind. Norag nodded solemnly. She was right. It all lines up. His hand tightened around Lenore's. "But that means—" Lenore's voice trailed off, the implications of the prophecy hanging heavy in the air between them. "Yes," Norag confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing we can do." As if in response to their realization, a faint luminescence began to fill the chamber. Unlike the familiar warmth of mana or the erratic flares of light they'd encountered before, this glow was different. Softer, almost curious. Norag and Lenore exchanged puzzled glances, both sensing something had changed, but neither able to articulate what. The door they had entered through now stood behind them, a portal back to the world they knew, a realm of uncertainty and growing chaos. But ahead, a new path beckoned, a step into Akaroth and the destiny that awaited them. Norag's mind raced with hope and fear in equal measure. We got what we needed, he thought, though not the answers we expected, an answer nonetheless. He took a deep breath, centering himself for the challenges to come. "Lenore," he said quietly, "do you feel that? It's different here." She nodded, her eyes scanning the chamber. "It's like the air itself is alive, but it's not mana, and it's not like the light we've seen before. What do you think it means?" Norag shook his head. "I'm not sure, but whatever it is, I think it's tied to this prophecy, to what we're meant to do." The subtle glow seemed to pulse gently, almost in rhythm with their hushed conversation. Both Norag and Lenore felt a faint tingling in their fingers, reminiscent of magical potential, yet alien and unpredictable. "I hope we can figure this out," Norag thought, glancing at Lenore. With a shared nod of determination, tinged with uncertainty, they stepped forward together. Whatever lay beyond, be it answers, more questions, or challenges they couldn't yet imagine, they would face it together. As they moved towards the new path, the strange luminescence seemed to follow, neither guiding nor impeding, but present in a way that neither could ignore. They were stepping into the unknown, carrying the weight of a prophecy they didn't fully understand, and the faint stirrings of a power they had yet to comprehend. Prologue. The Final Light. Echoes guide the souls lost, Manna lights the voided dark. In their absence we find strength. In their memory we forge destiny. Words of the first Light Lord, spoken on the final day of Inundil in the year 34 ABI. To a common Acherothian, Einar might have seemed like just another traveller. But beneath his measured stride and watchful gaze, a storm of purpose brewed. Each step brought him closer to Witherters, to the Tower of Light, and to a confrontation years in the making. The weight of his mission pressed upon him, heavier than any armour he'd ever worn. His walk was rhythmic, almost as if he were following a specific number of steps, a habit born of years of discipline and caution. Glancing behind him, Einar counted the figures trailing in his wake, his pupils narrowing into vertical slits as the whites of his eyes yellowed slightly. His face, paler than that of a typical Acherothian, bore a single scar that ran across his left eye and extended downward, a mark of battles long past but never forgotten. Under his obsidian cloak, those who walked near him noticed his armour. Not unusual in this heavily guarded place, but it was a mixture of dents and scratches. This was a man who had seen his fair share of battles, perhaps too many. The pommel of his blade, Nexus, rested on his waist, glistening on the left side of his body. Even sheathed, the weapon seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if it were drinking in the very light around it. Beside him, his steed, a creature whose ebony coat glistened in the sunlight, trotted with a grace that belied its formidable presence. The horse, R10, moved like a living shadow, its hooves barely making a sound on the well-worn path. As Einar neared the borders of Witherters, the capital of Batesian, he encountered not only physical barriers, but also a palpable tension that hung in the air like a brewing storm. Each checkpoint was a testament to the city's wary heart, its gates guarded not by mere men, but by the scars of past sieges and the silent oath to repel any future threats. Batesian embraced its people with heat so intense it seemed to warp the very air before them, turning the horizon into a mirage that danced out of reach. Einar's eyes tried to adjust, but his efforts were in vain. The air was just too warm. Despite the heat, their agriculture persevered. The nearby farms enjoyed a bountiful harvest, and dew glistened on the grass. As he walked on it, the grass felt solid yet moist. The air may have been warm, but the fresh waters that ran nearby still reminded him of home. Einar tightened the saddle on R10, keeping a close eye on those walking behind him. He did not want to be followed. He stepped aside, letting others pass before him, to have a moment for reflection. As he did, he noticed how the shadows seemed to cling to him, as if drawn to his presence. He dismissed the thought, focusing on the task at hand. "Oh, thank you, kind sir. Are you sure I can step ahead?" a merchant asked, clutching the reins on his cart with a grip so tight you might think someone was trying to take it. His eyes darted quickly at an emblem pinned on Einar's cloak, before staring at him once again. "No, please, go ahead." Einar rushed the merchant along with his hand so as not to welcome further questions. There was something calming about his voice. It put people at ease, though Einar knew it was more than just his tone. It was a gift, one that he had learned to use sparingly. He followed as the guards called forth each of the awaiting visitors. He turned his head towards R10, but his ears focused on the conversations being had beside the gates. "Reason for your visit, personal or business?" a guard inquired. His spear pointed towards the sky, its head reflecting the sunlight that filtered through the portcullis. "Business. I'm here to sell my harvest, sir." The friendly merchant spoke out as he lifted the cloth protecting his vegetables and stock. The greenery on display stood out in stark contrast to the reds that draped the gate walls. "If you're here to sell, then you should have your license. Please present it," the guard said, unfocused on the man himself, but inspecting the wares he presented. "Oh, here you are. My reading isn't so good. I hope I signed it all okay," the merchant responded as he handed a folded piece of paper to the soldier. It seemed less rigid than papers presented by others. "Sorry it's a little wet. The heat is getting to me." Fine. Take your vegetables and head down to the second checkpoint. Pay your toll along with the merchant fee." The guard signalled with his hand, continuing to not pay attention to the merchant. "Next!" His voice boomed through the queue, each person rising to attention as they took another step forward, and the questions started again. "I wonder, Arten, what do we do now?" While gently stroking the mane of his most dependable ally, he whispered so as not to disturb anyone in line. The horse nickered softly, its dark eyes seeming to understand more than a mere animal should. He had no documents to present to the guards. He was here for personal reasons, but you do not enter a city within Batesian without proof, especially not the capital of Witherters. The wars here shattered hope and kept the people vigilant. Einar's hand unconsciously moved to Nexus, feeling the cold steel beneath his fingers. The blade seemed to hum in response, as if eager for what was to come. Einar watched as the final few visitors filtered through, and within moments he was the last. He stood alongside Arten in the grass-laden off-road, glancing as he saw two armoured men begin their approach. The sun gleamed across their armour. An average person would have had impaired vision. Their hand needed to be raised as a shield. But Einar stood there, unyielding. The light seemed to bend around him, casting deeper shadows than one would expect in the bright day. "A steed as noble as yours is a rare sight in Witherters, stranger," remarked the first guard, his gaze not on Einar but on the mare that moved like shadow-made flesh beside him. "What winds bring you and your companion to our gates?" The first guard approached Arten, his hand rising to meet the mare's chin. "You may ask, but depending on whether you touch my horse, the answer may change." Einar stood firm, his eyes fixed on the first guard. The second guard noticed the tension. This was the same man who paid no mind to the merchant. His clipboard now rested upon his waist, gripped in a singular hand. "Spen, do not touch it." The second guard spoke with a force only seen in militant leaders. The sun entered his helmet, exposing his determined blue eyes. Within them lay a sense of duty and honor, traits that Einar knew all too well. "We do request that you tell us of your purpose here, sir." Einar rested his hand on Nexus. He used his other hand to rifle through the satchel he kept on his belt. The sound of coins, glass, and paper repeated as he kept looking before looking back up at the guards. "I don't have my papers. It's been a long journey. I think they may have been lost in my last bout," he spoke. His voice was metallic and resonating, with an undercurrent that seemed to make the shadows around him deepen. "You can't come in without Spen spoke with speed, with a slight strain on his voice from being unable to pet the horse. The raised hand of his ally quickly cut him off. "You appreciate that we have people to answer to. We cannot simply let you enter. Who are you here to meet? Perhaps we can send word and have your story confirmed," the second guard asked. Einar's gaze shifted to Spen, who fixated on the open satchel. The coins he held cast a warm glow on Spen's face. Einar never considered bribery as an option. Can honourable men be bribed? The thought was fleeting, replaced by a darker one. There were other ways to persuade, ways that dwelled in shadow. As he clenched his fist to attempt an alternative method of persuasion, An interruption came from a distance. Closer to the gates, the merchant stepped slowly forward, his back bending towards the ground. "Sorry, lads, I meant to tell you. My friend here is going to help me today as the guard for my wares. I have all the documents here." The merchant supplied the papers to the guards, and as the second guard reviewed them, his demeanour changed. "Apologies for the hold-up, sir. Fees seem to have been paid, and you have all the relevant details for an appointed guard. I wish you both a good day of selling." He said this as he extended his hand out to Einar. Einar took it, shaking it with a significant grip. He was right. This guard had also seen his fair share. As their hands touched, Einar felt a brief surge of power, as if the very essence of the guard's life force was there for the taking. He quickly suppressed the urge, reminding himself of his true purpose. The pair walked away, Spen still eyeing Arten and the bundles of gold within Einar's satchel. "I saw you struggling there. I hope it's all right. I jumped in." The merchant turned his body now, setting the pace for their walk towards the gate. "The name is Peregrine Ibarra. You can call me Perry. All my friends do." "Thank you, Peregrine. I must ask, why help me?" Einar unbuckled his bag from Arten, swinging it across his shoulder as the pair followed the set pace. "My daughter was going to come with me, but she had other plans, so it's just me today. I saw your badge, a fellow traveller from Messim." Einar nodded, his hand unconsciously moving his cloak over to cover the badge. It was a relic from another life, one he had left behind long ago. "There you go, just like me. I'm from Cornick Farms. As my father would say, everyone in Messim is our neighbour, no matter how far their doors are from ours," Perry said. His walk slowed slightly as they finally approached the gate. He presented the papers, and as the portcullis lifted, the sound of metal grinding on metal created a sharp echo in the air. Einar felt a strange sensation as they passed through, as if he were crossing a threshold not just into the city, but into a new chapter of his life. Upon entering Witherters, the city's vibrant embrace enveloped the pair, as the hustle of commerce and the sounds of conversation washed over them like the late tide. The major thoroughfare, wide and grand, featured buildings of ancient stone lining its sides. These buildings had intricate carvings adorning their facades, telling tales of the city's storied past. These edifices, some standing for centuries, bore the weight of history with stoic grace, their windows aglow with the warm lights of hearths and lanterns. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked goods wafting from open doorways, intermingling with the salty tang of the sea, evoking the city's profound bond with the waters that embraced it. As they stepped deeper into the capital, the majestic avenues transformed into a lively marketplace. It was pulsing with life. This was the true soul of Witherters, a kaleidoscope of both colour and sound. The stalls buzzed as patrons attended the loud calls from the merchants, their voices yelling with a symphony of eagerness and charm. Some peddled clothing from the other regions of Akaroth, while the rest sold wares ranging from spices that promised heat to forged metals from the unknown. Newcomers in the city eagerly dived into haggling and buying. Einar's keen eyes caught details that others might miss. A pair of guards, their armour bearing the emblem of the Light Lords, hurried past, their hushed conversation carried on the wind. "Another luminant missing. That's 3 this month," one whispered. "Quiet," the other hissed. "We're not supposed to speak of it." Einar's brow furrowed slightly, filing away this snippet of information. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, quickly suppressed. "It's just bracing, isn't it? My father took me here when I was a boy, still in awe every time I visit," Perry said as he waved at familiar friends within the city walls. Einar nodded silently, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The shadows seemed to deepen wherever his gaze fell, though none but him seemed to notice. Perry, undeterred by Einar's reticence, continued, "You know, there's something about Witherters that always feels like coming home. Don't you think? Where are you from originally?" A shadow passed over Einar's face. Home is a complicated concept. "Ah, a wanderer then." Perry's voice held no judgment, only curiosity. "Must be exciting, seeing all corners of Acheroth, though I imagine it can get lonely." Einar's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Loneliness is preferable to some companionships." Perry raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight behind Einar's words. "Sounds like there's a story there. Bad falling out." "You could say that," Einar replied, his tone making it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. They walked in silence for a moment before Perry spoke again, his voice softer. "You know, my old man used to say that a man's past is like a heavy cloak. You can try to shed it, but its warmth is always there when you need it." Einar's eyes flickered to Perry, a mix of surprise and something deeper in his gaze. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Perry nodded, a hint of sadness in his smile. "Taught me everything I know. He even taught me about people. For instance, I'd wager you're not just here for a holiday, are you?" Einar's hand instinctively moved towards Nexus, but Perry raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Listen, friend, we all have our secrets. I'm just saying, whatever brought you here, I hope you find it." As they continued their walk, Einar immediately noticed the imposing statue of an armored warrior standing solemnly in the city square. The figure, imposing and regal, bore a striking resemblance to a seasoned warrior, with a stern expression that hinted at the weight of leadership. In its hand was a long sword that seemed to glow softly, even in the daylight, a symbol of his connection to the ancient powers of light. Perry, noticing Einar's fixed stare, sought to ease the tension by providing a brief history. "That's our first king, Tenebris Suncloaked. He saved Batesian from destruction by stopping a rogue giant. It was a fierce battle, but it's said that without him, we wouldn't be here today." Einar's expression hardened momentarily at the mention, a reminder of the deep-seated conflicts and the lost balance between the people of Acheroth and Mana. Acheroth's history underwent a sharp turn when it went from a world where the giants were present to one where only their memories remained. But there was something else in his gaze, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. Perry, misreading his silence for curiosity, hastily added, "It's a lot to take in, I know. The Tenebris' act was heroic, but it sure changed how we interact with light. These days, regular lightless like me don't wield it. It's all in the hands of better people than me, those who know how to manipulate it with tools and relics." Einar's silence held firm, a testament to his unwavering resolve, but his eyes lingered on the statue, as if seeing beyond its surface to some hidden truth. "I have to say, though," Perry whispered as he scanned for nearby guards, "I don't agree with what the Light Lords did to him. To take his home like that, unspeakable." Beyond the market, the architecture of this land rose to the peaks of perfection, its Dracarian influences not lost on either visitor. The towering structures loomed with a blend of opulence and authority, their intricate carvings and soaring spires commanding attention. Each guarded the skies like sentinels, spires that pierced the very heavens. Within this circle of towers stood the tallest structure, the Tower of Light, which served as the home to the Order of Light Lords and their elite guard, the Luminants. Each white stone brick of the beacon captured the final rays of the sun. A glow, almost ethereal, ablaze, Legend has it that the god of fire, Kalios, bestowed this tower upon the people of Batesian. Even today, it stands as Akaroth's tallest structure, a sight many visitors seek. Ah, the untouched tower. It really is breathtaking. During the wars, they say this spire remained standing without a single missing brick or cracked window. It's truly beautiful, Perry said as his eyes rose in awe, a smile extending from cheek to cheek. Einar walked in silence. His eyes settled on the Tower of Light, and a deep, unspoken turmoil churned within him. The sight of its reaching spires, etched against the dimming sky, was like a key, unlocking the chambers of nostalgia he'd long since tried to seal away. This tower, a sentinel of stone and ambition, had once been his beacon, guiding him towards a destiny he'd eagerly embraced. Now it stood as a testament to paths diverging, a silent observer to the dreams he'd had to abandon. Time passed, yet the sight still stirred reverence and longing for a part of himself left within those walls. The tower, bathed in the last light of day, appeared both majestic and haunting, embodying the dual nature of his feelings towards it and the life it represented. As the sun dipped lower, Einar noticed how the shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen around him, as if responding to his presence. "The markets are lively today," Perry remarked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. His voice, rich with the timbre of experience, carried a note of warmth that seemed to invite confidence without demanding it. Einar's response was a measured nod, his eyes scanning the throng of people as if searching for something unseen. Lively. His voice was low, and the word carried a multitude of meanings. It was a rare verbal bridge from a man who walked in solitude, even in the company of others. Perry chuckled softly, the sound a gentle nudge in the quiet space between them. "You know, I remember when the streets were nothing more than dirt paths, and the tallest building was the mill at the edge of town. Times change, people change, and yet here we are." His words trailed off, a thoughtful expression shadowing his features as he glanced at Einar, perhaps seeking a glimpse into the enigmatic warrior's thoughts. The surrounding city thrummed with energy, but Perry seemed to draw a quiet strength from this vibrancy. It existed in stark contrast to Einar's demeanour. Nevertheless, despite their differences, shared words and moments were creating an undeniable bond. As they approached the town square, Perry's steps slowed, and he turned to face Einar fully. "I may not know much about the battles you face or the demons you chase," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that went beyond the surface. "But remember this, lad. The weight of a man's sword does not measure his strength, but how he carries his burden with grace." In that moment, words were unnecessary. The depth of their connection transcended even spoken language. With a final nod, Perry turned away towards the markets, leaving Einar to face the looming silhouette of the Tower of Light alone. The farmer's simple wisdom held a beacon of hope, reminding him that no one is truly alone, even in the darkest times. As Perry's figure disappeared into the crowd, Einar felt a momentary pang of regret. The merchant's kindness had touched something within him, a part he thought long buried. But he quickly steeled himself. There was no room for such sentiments now. He had a mission to complete, a destiny to fulfill. The tower stood as a truth beacon amidst the lively capital. The silhouette stood in contrast to the setting sun. As the day lost its light, the tower brightened its own. Einar approached with measured caution, taking each step with reverence and unresolved emotion. As he drew nearer, the shadows seemed to deepen around him as if drawn to his presence. The guards stood vigilant, embodying the steadfast might of Batesian. Adorned in white and red, Their armour not only served as a testament to their allegiance, but also mirrored the colours of the region itself, red for the enduring strength of its people, and white for the prosperity that flourished under its watch. The guards, figures of discipline and authority, bore halberds that gleamed under the setting sun, their edges sharp and ready. As Einar made his approach, the air grew tense. It was a silence that spoke louder than words. His steps, measured, carried him to where the guards barred his path, their expressions unreadable behind helmets that were adorned with the emblem of Batesian, a fierce wolf. "Halt! State your purpose," one guard said, his voice echoing off the ancient stones of the tower's entrance. The command acted as an undeniable barrier, like the looming stone walls. Despite the simplicity of his attire, Einar's commanding presence stood in stark contrast to the ornate displays of the guards before him as he paused. He reached for his left hand. The guards' grip on their weapons visibly tightened, but Einar moved his hands up before moving once more. With a calm that belied the storm within, he slowly removed his gloves, revealing hands marked by the scars of countless battles. Yet it was not the scars that drew the eye, but the mark etched into his skin, a symbol of a time long past. The mark of the luminant, a sword with antlers elegantly arching through its blade, and a crescent moon cradling the blade to its hilt. As he revealed the mark, the shadows around him seemed to writhe, as if recoiling from the symbol of light. The guards leaned forward, their eyes narrowing as they took in the emblem. It was a symbol known only to those within the inner sanctum of the order, a mark of distinction and service that spoke of secrets and allegiances hidden from the common eye. "He bears the mark," the guard said to his comrade, his tone shifting from authoritative to one tinged with a hint of curiosity, perhaps even respect. The guards exchanged glances, the yellow of their tabards a stark contrast against the darkening sky, a silent conversation passing between them. After a moment, the lead guard stepped aside, the tip of his halberd shifting to point towards the ground, an unspoken acknowledgment of Einar's right to pass. "As you will, Luminant," the guard intoned, a formal recognition of Einar's claim. With a nod, Einar stepped forward, crossing the threshold. Behind him the guards resumed their posts, a silent promise to protect Batesian's legacy, no matter the mysteries or challenges that lay hidden within the tower's ancient walls. As Einar moved past the entrance, he noticed an enormous figure laying just outside the tower, partially hidden in the shadow of the grand structure. It was a moon-seer dragon, its skin a brilliant cyan that glowed like the sea itself. Its chest bore symbols reminiscent of the moon phases, each one increasing in size as the eyes led down. The dragon lay asleep, its massive body curled protectively around itself, exuding an aura of both immense power and serene tranquility. A set of wings, shimmering in the light, wrapped around it like a blanket, guarding it from the cold air that approached with the night. Its breath came in deep, rhythmic gusts, each exhalation sending a faint wave of warmth through the air. Its presence was a reminder of the formidable guardianship that the tower commanded, and the ancient alliances that fortified its walls. Einar paused for a moment, taking in the awe-inspiring sight. The dragon's presence was a symbol of the deep-rooted history and the mystical forces that surrounded this land. It was a rare and humbling sight, even for someone of his experience. He knew its rider well, and so resumed his steps, feeling the gravity of the place and the weight of his purpose here. As he passed the dragon, he felt a strange sensation, as if the shadows around him were drinking the creature's latent power. Navigating the Tower of Light was akin to traversing the very pages of history. As Einar ascended the spiral staircase, his footsteps echoed softly against the well-polished stone. each step a stark reminder of his past, a past intertwined with the very essence of this place. Cool air filled the tower, silent and reverent, as if the walls held lost secrets. Torches mounted on the walls cast flickering shadows, their light dancing over ancient tapestries and carvings that depicted the lore of the Order. He walked towards the office of the head Light Lord. The door, like a gateway to a shadowy and intricate past, loomed ahead. He took a deep breath and pushed through the large oak doors, the office of his former mentor and captor revealed. As Einar stepped into the sanctum, his gaze fell upon Solomon, who looked up from his work with an expression that mingled surprise with stoic resignation. Solomon's physical presence commanded immediate attention, his stature imposing yet worn by the years of leadership and burden. His hair, a distinguished mane of silver, framed a face marked by deep lines, each one telling a story of decisions weighed and fates altered. His sharp and penetrating eyes held a glint of the wisdom and the weight of command that had defined his rule over the Order. Solomon wore the traditional garb of the Light Lord, a garment that spoke volumes of his status and the respect it commanded. The robes were a rich tapestry of the Order's history and its values, woven from fabrics that shimmered with a subtle, enchanting light. The dominant color was a deep celestial blue, reminiscent of the sky as night stands strong, symbolizing his pursuit of knowledge and truth in the darkness. Intricate patterns of silver thread adorned the hem and sleeves, depicting the sacred sigil of the Order, the same sigil Einar bore on his skin, a sword enveloped by a crescent moon and antlers that gracefully arched over the blade. They were the patterns of a guardian, mixed with the wisdom that the Luminant swore to uphold. The clasp was the Order's sigil. It fastened the cloak at the neck, a beacon of his authority. Like a shadow, the fabric followed him, the edges catching the light that illuminated the room, casting ethereal patterns across the stone floor. The room itself was lit by a series of floating globes of moonlight, their radiant light filling every corner with a cool, soft glow. This display of control over moonlight was a mark of Solomon's power as a moonseer, but to Einar, it was a mockery of the divine gifts they had been granted. This was as a joke, a disrespectful use of their godly endowments, turning sacred power into mere utility. As Einar entered, the shadows around him seemed to deepen, as if trying to shield him from the overwhelming light. Solomon, seated amid scrolls and arcane relics, appeared every bit the sage and leader of the Order, his demeanor calm yet commanding. The light cast upon his features revealed a mix of surprise and contemplation at Einar's arrival. "Einar," Solomon began, a note of solemnity in his voice, "your presence here is unexpected. I assume you've come because of Light Lords." Einar's expression remained impassive, his stance resolute. "Their fate is of no concern to me," he stated, his voice betraying none of the turmoil that brewed beneath the surface. "I am here for you, Solomon, to remind you that some powers should not be taken so lightly." Solomon studied Einar for a moment, the lines on his face deepening. "I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that time had tempered your resentment. Light in the wrong hands brings nothing but destruction. Our actions, however drastic, have always served to prevent such outcomes." Einar's lips curled into a grim smile. "Spare me your justifications, Solomon. You cloak your ambitions in the guise of protection, claiming to be the world's savior. But it is your Order, your actions that have sown the seeds of discord and war. You speak of keeping the truth, yet every word you spoke to me was nothing more than a lie." As Einar spoke, The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, the light from Solomon's globes dimming imperceptibly. Solomon's gaze did not waver, his voice carrying a note of sadness. "I had hoped you would understand in time. The power you wield, which we all wield, requires guidance and restraint. The Lord's disappearance, the chaos that follows, it only underscores the necessity of our mission." "You're wrong." Einar's disdain was palpable. "Your mission has only ever brought suffering. And now you sit here, surrounded by your precious scrolls, still believing you can control the fate of this world." The tension between them thickened, a tangible force that filled the room with the weight of unspoken accusations and regrets. "Call me what you will, Einar, a tyrant, a misguided fool. But know this, what I did with honor, in the name of peace and prosperity," Solomon said, his voice laden with a complex mixture of regret and resignation. "Despite everything, I cannot help but think of you as a son." The word hung in the air, a provocation that stoked the fires of Einar's resentment. "A son," Einar's reply dripped with venom. "You saw in me nothing but a weapon to be wielded. My power, not my well-being, was your concern. And now you dare speak to me about family, after what you took from me." Solomon's expression shifted, the sorrow deepening in his eyes. Yet beneath the surface an unwavering conviction remained. "I understand your anger and your sense of betrayal, but believe me when I say that everything I did believing it was for the greater good. You think I don't grieve for the path you've chosen?" It was then that Einar reached for his blade Nexus, its dark steel pulsing with a light that seemed to devour rather than illuminate. Runes of light etched along its length glimmered with sinister energy, each one a silent testament to a life taken. As Einar drew the blade, the room filled with his audible intake of breath, laying bare the gravity of his actions. The shadows in the room seemed to coalesce around Nexus, as if drawn to its power. "You understand nothing, Solomon." The words barely escaped Einar's lips as the first of his tears crashed onto the marble floor. Solomon's gaze locked onto the weapon, the horror unmistakable in his eyes as he recognized the runes of his fallen comrades. With a resolve hardened by years of contemplation and sorrow, Solomon reached for his own weapon, freedom. As Solomon unsheathed the blade, tendrils of smoke curled from its opalescent surface, weaving into ribbons that trailed behind him, creating a dance of light and shadow. Each ribbon birthed another, a network of ethereal roots that sought the heavens, their whispers echoing the solemnity of the moment. Drawing upon the moonlight that filled the room, Solomon closed his eyes momentarily, focusing his energy. The globes of light around them began to dim as their power was drawn into the blade. The room grew darker, the once bright moonlight now concentrated into the opalescent surface of freedom. The blade absorbed the light, amplifying its brilliance until it shimmered like the sun itself. "So that is why you are here," Solomon stated, the realization of true intentions settling like a shroud. "So be it. But know this, Einar, I will defend the order against you, and I do so with a heavy heart." As the light infused the blade, the tendrils of white smoke thickened and expanded, becoming more vibrant and ethereal. The energy pulsed through the weapon, enhancing its power and causing the ribbons of smoke to swirl and weave more intricately. The light within the blade seemed almost alive, casting Solomon in a halo of celestial energy. Einar, Nexus pointed towards his enemy in this moment, faced Solomon, the distance between them charged with the echoes of 1,000 possibilities, of paths diverging and converging once more in conflict. "This is the only way," he said, his voice a mix of defiance and sorrow. "Your order, your ideals. They've caused enough suffering. It ends now." As the two stood, a momentary silence enveloped them, a breath in the shadow of destiny. Then, with the fluidity born of necessity and honed by years of training, they moved, performing a ballet of light and darkness. Their blades mourned with each clash, singing songs of loss. The room, once a bastion of quiet power and scholarly pursuit, transformed into an arena of light, shadow, and swirling energies as Einar and Solomon faced off. Each man, fueled by conviction and haunted by memories of a shared past now shattered, was prepared to unleash the full extent of their abilities. Einar, his blade nexus aglow with runic magic, cast a menacing silhouette against the walls lined with bookshelves. The air crackled with tension, as if expecting a clash. Solomon, with freedom in hand, stood resolute, the opalescent blade casting ethereal shadows that danced across the room. As the first blow struck, the sound of steel against steel resonated with a clarion call that marked the beginning of their duel. Utilizing the speed he had acquired through the death of an ally, Einar moved through the area with a fluidity that belied the urgency of his mission. Each strike was a blend of precision and power, aimed not just at defeating Solomon, but at dismantling the ideology he represented. Solomon, seasoned and skilled, parried with the grace of one who had spent a lifetime mastering the blade. "You cannot erase what we have built, Einar. The Order is more than its leaders. It is an ideal." His voice commanded attention as he thrust forward, the blade slicing through the air with lethal intent, a glint of steel flashing in the dim light. Einar, undeterred, spoke out. "An ideal built on lies and manipulation." With a flick of his wrist he imbued Nexus with fire, the flames licking the blade and casting a lurid glow. But these weren't ordinary flames. They were darker, almost purple in hue, hinting at a power beyond mere light magic. The battle intensified, and the exchange of blows was a testament to their skills and desperation. As they fought, Einar sought to use the environment to his advantage, darting between bookshelves, sending scrolls and tomes flying with each near miss. The commotion caused the orbs of sunlight to flicker erratically, casting shifting patterns of light that gave their duel an otherworldly quality. Shadows seemed to follow Einar's movements, deepening in his wake and retreating from Solomon's light. Solomon showed his combat mastery in this moment, wielding his blade with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. His deft hands guided the weapon as it danced through the air, alive with ribbons of white smoke. These tendrils, slicing with the elegance of controlled manner, caught Einar unexpectedly, marking his flesh with stinging cuts. Using this as an opportunity to shift the tide, Solomon called upon a flash of moonlight that filled the room, obscuring vision and dampening the fiery glow of Einar's blade. As his eyes tried to adjust to this change in luminance, Einar faced a critical choice. His body endured the skillful strikes. The pain urged him towards self-preservation, to use a rune to heal and regain his strength. Yet pride and determination clouded his judgment. Driven by his own hubris, he instead invoked a rune that would pierce the veil of light, allowing him to see Solomon's movements and expect his attacks. This decision, while bold, left his wounds unattended, a gamble that placed victory above his own well-being. As the rune activated, Einar's eyes shifted, the pupils narrowing to slits, a hint of his true nature breaking through. The light was radiant and persevering. His body was burning through pain and desire. Einar spoke out. "Fight me, coward!" His words echoed through the air. Yet Solomon remained elusive, a shadow within the light. His presence felt, but was unseen. The tension mounted as Einar navigated the sunlight, Nexus poised and ready, its flames extinguished but its threat undiminished. Then, in a breath, the silence shattered. Solomon emerged from behind Einar, freedom raised for a decisive blow. The air tensed, time seeming to slow as Solomon hesitated, his blade hovering inches from Einar's back. A lifetime passed in that pause, reflecting the choices made and paths walked. The boy he raised now stands as his nemesis. He snapped back, standing strong as he drew in the energy around him, ready to deal the final blow. Awaiting the moonlight to power his blade, he focused. But silence. His light was spent. The moon had not yet risen on the outside. He had no power here. Einar sensed the shift, the brief lapse in Solomon's resolve and power. He spun with the grace of a dancer, his own blade meeting freedom's descent in a clash that resonated through the room.
I see through your lies. Your hesitation is your weakness.
His voice was a blend of triumph and sorrow. Solomon, taken aback by his own momentary falter, stumbled, the weight of his hesitation causing a chasm to open between them. Einar pounced on the chance, his actions driven by a mix of desperation and tenacity. With a surge of power, his blade became a whip of darkness, a manifestation of his will. The ethereal tendrils, a twisted mirror of Solomon's blade, crackling with energy as they lashed out, ensnaring Solomon and pulling him off balance. The room, once a sanctum of knowledge and order, now bore witness to the irrevocable act of their tragic dance. Bookshelves toppled, scrolls and artifacts scattered as the two combatants struggled, the outcome hanging in the balance. "Don't do this. It won't change things. We can still get past what you've done. I can help you," Solomon said as he laid at the mercy of Einar. Nexus gleaming with a menacing light, poised for the final strike. The air between them crackled with the remnants of their spent powers, the mist beginning to dissipate, revealing the stark reality of the moment.
"Because of you, I grew up without them,"
Einar said, his voice resonating with the conviction of his beliefs.
"In a place where all of you saw me as nothing more than a monster. So, a monster I have become."
With those last words, Einar delivered the killing blow, with Nexus slicing through the air with a finality that echoed through the chamber. Solomon, the head lord, fell, his blade shattering and the mist retreating in mourning. The moment the final light dimmed in Solomon's eyes, an ethereal glow briefly illuminated Einar's blade, as his mentor's rune etched itself next to the others. He gripped Nexus as the light flowed through him. Now thrumming with the power of the fallen lord, Einar turned away from the man he once knew, the heavy burden of his actions settling upon his shoulders. As Solomon's life force faded, the shadows in the room seemed to surge, growing deeper and more profound. For a moment, Einar's silhouette seemed to blur, as if he were one with the darkness itself. The wounds he had ignored now asserted themselves with vengeance, each cut and bruise a stark testament to the ferocity of their clash. His body, pushed to the limits of human endurance, voiced its protest against the exertion it had undergone. Blood, his own, marked the path of his victory, a crimson trail that spoke volumes in the silence of the aftermath. The sharp echo of approaching footsteps abruptly pierced the air. Two guards, drawn by the cacophony of their battle, paused at the threshold, their expressions shifting from determination to horror as they took in the sight of their fallen leader. "Stop!" their voices laced with shock and authority. But Einar, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and resolve, did not heed their calls. He felt the newfound energy of Solomon's rune surging through him. His light was rejuvenated and he began his advance. With every step towards them, The marble floor cracked under the intense pressure and speed of his advance, a physical manifestation of the charged atmosphere. As they braced for conflict, Einar made a split-second decision, his eyes catching the central empty column that ran alongside the tower's spiral staircase. In a display of sheer will and the potent magic at his command, Einar leapt, diving into the column's void. Mid-descent, he activated one of his most powerful runes, taken from the finest of Stormchaser. His body began transforming into a being of pure lightning. It was a spectacle and a statement, a convergence of his power and the need to escape. The air crackled and hissed around him as he descended, a streak of energy cutting through the tower's heart. But this lightning was different. It was almost tinged with darkness. The tower's alarms, already a discord of sound and light, reached a fever pitch. Below, an entire battalion of the tower's guards had assembled, their faces set in grim determination, weapons drawn and ready. As Einar emerged from his electrified descent, landing with the force of a tempest, the guards encircled him, their resolve palpable in each drip of sweat from their brows.
"These lords are no more. If you stand in my way, I will not hesitate."
His voice booming above the alarms. Despite the weight of his words, the battalion held firm, their commitment to their duty unwavering. With a nod of respect for their bravery, Einar steeled himself for the inevitable clash.
"So be it,"
he said, more to himself than to his adversaries. As he surged forward, the guards charged as well, a collective roar of defiance meeting his advance. A cataclysmic clash of magic and might shook the tower's foundations. Roaring thunder, profound sound, soul of the world, and then silence. Standing amidst the rubble, Einar remained, a lone figure surrounded by the evidence of his passage. The guards, those who had stood against him, lay scattered, their armor and bodies smouldering, a testament to his determination and the lethal efficiency of his escape. He grasped his blade, pulling it out of the ground and venturing out of the chaotic tower. He was now stepping into the uncertain night and the city that awaited him. As Einar moved through the exit of the tower, his gaze briefly caught the form of the dragon. Its eyes made deep contact with Einar, as a deep resonance growled from its throat. It knew what had happened, the death of its rider. The dragon roared in fury, a sound that echoed through the night, causing the very ground to tremble. It rose to its full height, wings unfurling in a display of raw power and grief. The beast's eyes locked onto the sky, burning with a mixture of rage and sorrow. With a powerful beat of its wings, it snaked into the sky, its path tracing an arc as it prepared to return below for the one responsible for its rider's death. Einar used the wave of dust to his advantage and blended into the shadows. He watched as the dragon soared above the city, its roars piercing the night sky. He knew it would be relentless in its hunt, driven by a bond deeper than mere loyalty. He moved swiftly, navigating the labyrinthine streets with the precision of a shadow, every step taken with the knowledge that he was being pursued. The night air of the capital greeted Einar with a chill that contrasted with the heat of battle still raging within him. The city, usually a labyrinth of light and shadow, became his arena of escape, the cobblestone streets whispering tales of freedom and pursuit. As Einar emerged from the tower's shadow, the city unfolded before him in chaos. Alarms had spread like wildfire, the tower's emergency casting an ominous glow that painted the streets in hues of danger. Guards, their armor clinking in the quiet night, formed barricades, their eyes scanning the crowds for the fugitive among them. The populace, caught between curiosity and fear, moved like a fractured tide, whispering a cacophony of speculation and rumor. With every intention of blending into the shadows, Einar reached for another rune, seeking the veil of darkness to cloak his escape. But as he summoned the power, a chilling void greeted his call, a stark reminder of his depleted reserves in the moment of need. His light, depleted from the intense confrontation and his subsequent escape, refused to answer. A momentary panic seized him. The realization that he must now rely solely on his wits and intimate knowledge of withers to evade capture. The streets where he once walked freely now morphed into a maze of peril. Each shadow whispered of hidden danger, and every alleyway loomed as a potential trap, increasing the tension of the situation. Einar became a ghost, his movements calculated, every step taken with precision born of desperation. He darted down narrow alleyways, his footsteps a silent echo on the stone. The market square, a bustling hub by day, offered a momentary respite as its maze of stalls and deserted carts provided cover. But the respite was brief. Shouts of his discovery spurred him on, pushing his limits as he sought the ever-elusive shadow of anonymity. As he navigated the chaotic tapestry of withers, Einar employed every trick and route known only to those who had called these streets home. Rooftops became pathways, the gaps between buildings leaps of faith. He was a spectre flitting through the night, always one step ahead of the relentless pursuit that dogged his heels, his form blending seamlessly with the shadows, sometimes seeming to disappear entirely, only to reappear moments later. The chase was a testament to Einar's resilience, a harrowing journey that tested not just his physical endurance, but the very essence of his resolve. With each close call and each narrow escape, the weight of his choices and the gravity of his path bore down on him. Yet, through it all, he persevered, driven by a singular purpose that transcended the immediate threat of capture. Amidst the moon's first light, Einar stood on the city's edge. The pursuit had thinned, and the guard's determination waned with the night's exhaustive chase. Breathing heavily, his body a tapestry of exhaustion and resolve, the gates to freedom, an archway to an uncertain future, beckoned with the promise of a life beyond the reach of his pursuers. As the threads of destiny would have it, his path veered once more towards the bonds of loyalty and the weight of unspoken promises. Guards had now trapped Perry, the helpful merchant, in the city's roiling chaos.
"We saw you with him. Who do you work for? Don't lie to us, old man."
The sight of Perry, beaten and bound, a victim of accusations of treason for his association with Einar, struck a chord deep within him. A frozen moment, a choice unveiled in shadows, between survival and sacrifice for another. He stood with the clarity of a man who had faced his demons. Einar decided. The freedom that lay just beyond the city gates dimmed compared to the immediate need to uphold the values he had fought so fiercely to reclaim. With a determined pivot, every deliberate step Einar took back towards Perry symbolized a shift from self-preservation to a higher purpose. The guards hesitated when they saw the fugitive they had been tasked to capture charging towards them, momentarily taking them aback. This hesitation proved to be their undoing. Einar, his skills honed in the crucible of countless battles, made quick work of them. His movements were a blur of efficiency and grace, his blade cutting through them like butter. Every fallen guard marked Einar's unwavering commitment to kind souls in an unkind world. As the last of the captors lay defeated, Einar kneeled before the merchant, his expression softening.
"What happened?"
Perry asked, his voice weak and his eyes clouded with confusion and pain. "This is not the time," Einar said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom and the sorrow of sacrifices made. "We need to leave." With careful hands, Einar helped Perry to his feet, each action taken with care. Perry stumbled but held himself against Einar.
"Thank you. You're a good man,"
Perry said. Einar's eyes glanced over at the old man. Words were said that he knew he did not deserve. As they left the city behind, Einar glanced back one last time. In the distance, the moon-seer dragon hovered above the tower, its roars of anguish echoing across the night sky. The dragon's mournful cries resonated with a pain that transcended the physical, a bond broken with the loss of its rider. With a final, heart-wrenching roar, the dragon shot into the sky, its form a streak of blue against the canvas of the night. Einar watched it disappear into the heavens, a sombre expression on his face. "Another has been freed," he murmured to himself, turning his back on the city and stepping into the uncertain future that awaited him. Together, they stepped through the city gates, leaving behind the stone and strife of witheters. A fresh dusk greeting them, a tapestry untouched by yesterday's conflicts, brimming with the promise of new beginnings. As they walked, Einar felt the weight of Nexus at his side, the blade humming with the power of the fallen Light Lords. He knew that his journey was far from over. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, a reminder of his true nature and the path that lay ahead. Chapter 1. Valeron. The golden light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy of Goldenroot Grove, casting a warm glow over the small village of Sproutvale. Birds chirped softly in the trees, their melodies harmonizing with the gentle rustling of leaves. It was a serene and peaceful morning, one that promised a day of calm and simple pleasures. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, an undercurrent of anticipation thrummed through the air, for today marked the beginning of Sproutvale's annual harvest festival. Valeron Greenleaf sat by his bedroom window, looking out at the forest that surrounded the village. His room was modest, furnished with handcrafted wooden pieces and adorned with various trinkets he had collected over the years. The window was slightly open, allowing a soft breeze to ruffle his messy hair. He gazed out at the lush green of the forest, feeling a deep connection to the world outside. Valeron was an elf of striking appearance. His lean, athletic frame was clothed in green and gold, colours that blended seamlessly with the natural surroundings. His teal eyes, glowing softly in the morning light, were set in a face of ethereal beauty, typical of his elven heritage. Faint, intricate tattoos etched across his high cheekbones and along his jawline pulsed gently with an inner light, though they held no special power. He was lightless, or so everyone believed. As he watched the village come to life below, Valeron's thoughts drifted to the festivities ahead. The harvest festival was always a time of joy and celebration, a moment when the entire village came together to revel in the bounty of their hard work. Yet for Valeron, it also brought a familiar sense of unease, a reminder of his perceived inadequacies. "Valeron, breakfast is ready." The voice was warm and comforting, filled with paternal love that Valeron cherished. With a sigh, he stood, stretching his lean frame before making his way downstairs to the kitchen. The kitchen was a cosy and rustic space, filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and herbal tea. Valeron Greenleaf, Valeron's father, stood at the hearth, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light streaming through the window. Despite his advanced years, Eamon cut an impressive figure. His silver hair was slicked back in a neat queue, and his beard was well trimmed. His face radiated strength and vitality. His eyes, a warm amber colour, seemed to glow with an inner light, akin to the dawning sun. Eamon turned as Valeron entered, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good morning, son," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "Did you sleep well?" Valeron nodded, taking a seat at the worn wooden table. "I did, father, though I must admit I'm a bit nervous about the festival preparations." Eamon's expression softened as he set a plate of warm bread and a steaming mug of tea before his son. "The festival will be wonderful, as it always is," he said, taking a seat across from Valeron. "I hear Darion has been working on something special for the occasion." At the mention of his best friend, Valeron's face brightened. "Yes, he's been very secretive about it. I can't wait to see what he's made." As they ate, father and son discussed the day's plans and the recent news in the village. Eamon spoke of the preparations for the festival, hinting at Valeron's role in helping with decorations and organizing the events. The conversation flowed easily, a testament to the close bond between them. After breakfast, Valeron's gaze was drawn to a partially open door down the hallway. Inside, he could see the gleam of polished metal, his father's old King's Guard armor. The armor was a relic of Eamon's past, meticulously maintained, but never worn since the death of Valeron's mother. It stood as a silent reminder of the strength and duty that had defined Eamon's earlier life. Valeron had often wondered about the stories behind that armor, the battles it had seen, the oaths it represented. But like many aspects of his father's past, it remained a mystery, wrapped in a silence that Eamon seemed reluctant to break. Stepping outside, Valeron took in the vibrant life of Sproutvale. The village was a picturesque settlement, with cottages made of timber and stone, their roofs covered in lush moss and climbing ivy. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with colourful flowers and bustling with activity. Children played games, and the sounds of laughter filled the air, creating an atmosphere of joy and community. Villagers greeted Valeron warmly as he made his way through the streets. He exchanged pleasantries with friends and neighbours, stopping to help an elderly merchant arrange her stall and chatting with others about their preparations for the festival. As he walked, Valeron couldn't help but notice the subtle glances and whispers that followed him. He was well liked by most in the village, but there was always some who kept an undercurrent of doubt and, sometimes, wariness. Being lightless in a world where so many possessed extraordinary abilities set him apart, and not always in ways he appreciated. His wanderings eventually led him to a building seemingly built of soot and brimstone. Its mounted signage was swinging freely in the wind, with its words visible to all. Fireforge and Son. This was where his best friend was hard at work. The forge was a sturdy building, constructed from stone and wood, with a large chimney that billowed smoke into the sky. The clang of metal on metal could be heard from a distance, a testament to the hard work being done inside. It was a sight to behold. As a sapphire Drakari, his friend's entire body was covered in scales that shimmered in varying shades of blue, from deep-sea hues to bright jewel-like tones. His draconic head was adorned with small, backward-sweeping horns, and his eyes were a brilliant, piercing topaz. But most impressive were his wings. Large, leathery appendages folded neatly against his back, capable of unfurling to an impressive span. He was working alongside his father and the owner of this establishment, Thrain, a stout dwarf with arms like tree trunks and hands calloused from years of metalwork. Thrain's dark hair and beard were neatly groomed, with intricate braids woven through both, adorned with small metal clasps that clinked softly as he moved. Despite the difference in their species, the familial resemblance between the pair was evident in their shared intensity and craftsmanship. "Morning, Darion. Morning, sir," Valeron called out as he approached the forge. Darion looked up from his work, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "V, just the person I wanted to see. Come, take a look at this." Valeron approached the forge, marvelling at the intense heat and the skill with which Darion and his father worked. Thrain acknowledged Valeron with a nod, his eyes never leaving the metal he was shaping. Darian held up a beautifully crafted rapier, its blade glinting in the light of the forge. "What do you think?" Valeron examined the rapier, awe spreading across his face. The blade was thin and elegant, perfectly balanced for swift, precise movements. But it was the hilt that truly caught his eye. Intricate steel vines seemed to grow from the pommel, twisting and intertwining to form a protective guard. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each section and tendril rendered in painstaking detail. As Valeron's fingers closed around the hilt, he felt as though he were grasping a living thing. The metal was warm to the touch, and the vine-like structures fit his hand perfectly, as if they had grown there just for him. "Dari, this is incredible," Valeron breathed, unable to take his eyes off the weapon. Darion's scales seemed to shimmer with pride at the compliment. "Thank you," he said with a grin, "but that's not all. Look closer at the pommel." Valeron tilted the rapier and gasped softly. Set into the base of the hilt was a vibrant blue scale, unmistakably one of Darion's own. It caught the light, sending flashes of sapphire dancing across the blade. "A part of me," Darion said softly, his voice taking on an unexpected tenderness. "So you'll always have me with you, V, no matter where you go." Valeron looked up, meeting Darion's gaze. There was something in those soft eyes, something more than just friendship, that made Valeron's heart skip a beat. But before he could fully process the moment, Darion cleared his throat and stepped back. "Anyway," Darion said, his usual jovial tone returning, "it's yours. You can wear it for the festival and, well, for whatever comes after." Valeron was touched by his friend's gesture, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you, Dari," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know." Darion shrugged, trying to play it off, but the pleased glint in his eyes betrayed his feelings. "Don't mention it. Just make sure you use it well." Thrain, pausing from his work, approached the two friends.
"Aye, Valeron,"
he said, his gruff voice carrying a note of approval.
"This lad's been working hard on that. Put a lot of heart into it. Use it wisely."
"I will, sir," Valeron replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you." As the day progressed, Valeron and Darion worked together to prepare for the festival. They hung colourful banners, set up stalls, and helped arrange the central square for the evening's festivities. The air was filled with excitement and anticipation, the villagers bustling about with an energy that was contagious. Throughout it all, Valeron was acutely aware of the rapier at his side. Its weight was unfamiliar but not unwelcome, and he found himself touching the hilt often, fingers tracing the intricate vines and brushing against the scales set within. Each time he did, he felt a warmth spread through him, a reminder of the bond he shared with Darion. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Eamon gathered the villagers in the square. He stood tall, his presence commanding attention without effort. The amber hue of his eyes seemed to glow brighter as he raised his hands, calling for silence.
"Friends and neighbours,"
Eamon's voice rang out clear and strong.
"As we prepare to celebrate another bountiful harvest, let us take a moment to give thanks for the blessings we have received."
A hush fell over the crowd as Eamon closed his eyes, his face turning towards the fading sunlight as he reached out, touching the very light that fell over the village. Slowly, orbs of golden light began to form in his palms, growing larger and brighter with each passing second. The villagers watched in awe as the orbs rose into the air, splitting and multiplying until dozens of glowing spheres hovered above the square. With a gentle gesture, Eamon sent the orbs floating outward. They drifted over the crowd, casting a soft, ethereal glow over upturned faces. Children laughed in delight, reaching out to touch the spheres of light as they passed. Valeron watched, transfixed, as the orbs began to dance in intricate patterns overhead. They swirled and swooped, leaving trails of sparkling light in their wake. It was a display of beauty and control that left the entire village in awe. As the light show reached its crescendo, the smaller orbs suddenly burst into thousands of tiny, glittering motes that rained down upon the crowd while the rest bobbed gently. Valeron felt the warm touch of the light on his skin, like the gentlest caress of the sun. For a brief moment, he thought he felt something stir within him, a flicker of warmth in his chest. But as quickly as it had come, the sensation faded, leaving him feeling oddly hollow. The village erupted into applause as Eamon bowed humbly and stepped down from the raised platform. Valeron saw several people approach his father, clasping his hands and offering words of praise and gratitude. Despite his age, Eamon showed no sign of fatigue from the display. Some villagers whispered that it was his connection to the sun that kept him strong and vital, healing his body and staving off the ravages of time. "That never gets old, does it?" Darian said, appearing at Valeron's side. His wings rustled slightly as he shifted, a sign of his excitement. Valeron nodded, unable to find words. He was proud of his father, of course, but the demonstration had only served to highlight the stark difference between them. As the excitement of the moment began to fade, Valeron felt the weight of his perceived inadequacy settling back onto his shoulders. Darian, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in his friend's mood. "Hey," he said softly, nudging Valeron with his elbow. "Don't let it get to you. You have your own strengths, V. You can't beat yourself up." Valeron attempted a smile, grateful for Darian's support even if he couldn't quite believe the words. "Thanks," he murmured. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find my place here. If I'll ever be able to contribute in a way that really matters." Darian's expression grew serious, a rare occurrence for the usually jovial young man. "You matter, Valeron. To me, to your father, to this village. Don't ever doubt that." He paused, then added with a grin. "Besides, someone has to keep me out of trouble, and that's a full-time job in itself." This time Valeron's laugh was genuine. "As if anyone could keep you out of trouble, Darry. I'm pretty sure you attract it like a lodestone attracts iron." As night fell, the village square came alive with music, laughter, and the warm glow of lanterns. The festival was in full swing, with villagers dancing, feasting, and reveling in the joy of community. Valeron found himself swept up in the celebrations, dancing with friends and sampling the delicious food laid out on long tables. Yet even as he participated in the festivities, a part of Valeron remained watchful, alert. Every so often his gaze would drift to the dark line of trees that marked the edge of Goldenroot Grove. Something felt off, a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the excitement of the festival. As the night wore on, Valeron's hand often strayed to the hilt of his new rapier. The touch of the vine-like guard and the smooth scale set within brought him comfort, grounding him amidst the swirling emotions and growing unease. The first rumble came just as the musicians were striking up a lively jig. It was low and distant, easily mistaken for thunder. A few villagers glanced up at the sky, but the stars twinkled brightly in the clear night air. "Strange," Valeron murmured to himself. "Not a cloud in sight." As the music picked up tempo, so did the rumbling. It came at irregular intervals, sometimes so faint it was nearly lost beneath the sounds of celebration, other times loud enough to rattle the plates on the banquet tables. The vibrations seemed to travel through the ground, up through Valeron's feet and into his chest. A cool wind began to pick up, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something else. something wild and ancient that Valeron couldn't quite place. The tree branches at the edge of the clearing swayed and creaked, their shadows dancing eerily in the lantern light. "Looks like we might be in for some weather," an old farmer commented, eyeing the tree line warily. "Don't recall the wind coming up like this before a storm, though." Valeron nodded absently, his eyes scanning the sky. There was still no sign of clouds, but he could have sworn he saw a large shadow pass momentarily over the stars, like a great bird in flight. But no bird could be that large. The music faltered as another rumble shook the ground, this one loud enough to set the lanterns swinging. A hush fell over the crowd, the celebratory mood giving way to nervous whispers and uneasy glances. Valeron sought out his father in the crowd, finding Eamon already looking his way. The concern in his father's eyes only heightened Valeron's sense of foreboding. A sudden gust of wind extinguished several lanterns, plunging parts of the square into darkness. In that moment, Valeron heard it, a sound that couldn't possibly be mistaken for thunder. It was a roar, primal and terrifying, that seemed to shake the very air around them. The rapier at Valeron's side hummed, as if responding to some unseen threat. He gripped the hilt tightly, his heart pounding in his chest as realization dawned. This was no storm approaching Sproutvale. It was something far more ancient, far more dangerous. And somehow, Valeron knew it was coming for them. As panic began to spread through the crowd, Valeron stood rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the night sky. The harvest festival, once a symbol of peace and plenty, was about to become the backdrop for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of Sproutvale and set Valeron on a path he could never have imagined. The roar that shattered the night sky was unlike anything Valeron had ever heard before. It was a sound that seemed to resonate in the very marrow of his bones, primal and terrifying. The festivities in the village square came to an abrupt halt, as all eyes turned skyward, searching for the source of that bone-chilling cry. For a moment, all was still. Then, with a thunderous crash that sent tremors through the ground, a massive shape burst through the canopy of Goldenroot Grove. Trees splintered and fell as the creature of legend revealed itself, its scales gleaming like polished obsidian under the moonlight. Its wings, vast and terrible, beat the air with enough force to extinguish nearby lanterns and send festival decorations scattering to the wind. Its tail was forked, with each end bearing a stinger that dripped with shadow. Panic erupted instantly. Screams filled the air as villagers scrambled for safety. Children cried out for their parents, merchants abandoned their stalls, and in the chaos, the creature's roar rose above it all, a sound of hunger and rage that froze the blood in Valeron's veins. Its massive head swung from side to side, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. It snapped at fleeing villagers, more playful than predatory, as if this were all some grand game. With each swipe of its tail or beat of its wings, more of the village was reduced to rubble. Valeron stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. He had no doubt this was a dragon. His father had told him dragons were rare, almost mythical creatures since the Dragonfall. To see one now, here in peaceful Sproutvale, seemed impossible. Yet the destruction unfolding before his eyes was all too real. "V!" Darian's shout snapped him back to reality. The Drakari was using his wings to shield a group of children, ushering them towards safety. "We need to evacuate the village." Nodding, Valeron shook off his paralysis and sprang into action. He ran through the square, guiding panicked villagers towards the surrounding forest. The rapier at his side seemed to pulse with energy, responding to the chaos around them. As they worked, Valeron caught sight of his father. Eamon stood tall amidst the panic,
his hands raised towards the sky. The golden light of the orbs began to draw into him as his light began growing in intensity until it rivaled the glow of the full moon overhead. "Everyone to the forest!" Eamon's voice boomed, magically amplified to carry over the din. "Quickly now!" The dragon, seeming to sense a challenge, turned its attention to Aemon. It let out another ear-splitting roar and lunged towards the Sun Speaker, jaws wide and claws extended. Grey smoke dripped from its maw as it moved to exhale. A stream of darkness fled its mouth towards its enemy. Aemon raised his hands in instinctive defense, creating a shield of pure sunlight. "Why are you here? Why now?" The questions this raised ran through Aemon's mind, but this was not the time. His shield drained his light rapidly, each flash of black flame cracking the very foundation of his defense. Time seemed to slow for Valeron as he watched the massive creature push his father back. His hand gripped the hilt of his rapier, and without thinking, he began to run towards Aemon, desperate to help. But before he could close even half the distance, Aemon's shield exploded outward in a blinding flash. The dragon recoiled, screeching in pain and fury as the light seared its eyes and scales. Aemon's voice rang out again, this time directed at his son. "Valeron, stay back! Help the others!" Torn between the desire to aid his father and the need to assist the fleeing villagers, Valeron hesitated. The dragon, recovering from Aemon's attack, seemed to notice him for the first time, its red eyes fixed on Valeron with an unsettling intensity, and for a moment the young elf felt a strange connection, as if some unspoken communication passed between them. The moment was broken as Darian grabbed Valeron's arm, pulling him away. "Come on, V! We need to go!" As they ran, helping stragglers and guiding people towards safety, Valeron couldn't shake the feeling that the dragon's attention remained fixed on him. Every time he glanced back, those glowing red eyes seemed to find him, regardless of the chaos surrounding them. The village square, so recently a scene of joy and celebration, had become a battlefield. Aemon stood at its centre, a beacon of golden light holding the dragon at bay. But with each passing moment, the creature grew bolder, its attacks more focused. Valeron and Darian reached the edge of the forest, where a group of villagers huddled in fear. Among them was Myra, the baker's daughter, clutching a small child to her chest. "Is everyone here?" Valeron asked, his eyes scanning the group. Myra shook her head, her face pale with fear. "Elder Thorn is still in his cottage. He couldn't make it out in time." Without hesitation, Valeron turned back towards the village. "I'll get him. Darian, stay here and keep everyone calm." "V, wait!" Darian called, but Valeron was already running back into the fray. The dragon's attention seemed divided between Aemon's persistent attacks and its own desire to wreak havoc. It smashed buildings with its tail, crushed market stalls under its massive feet, and occasionally snapped at fleeing villagers. But always, its gaze would return to Valeron. As he neared Elder Thorn's cottage, Valeron saw that part of the roof had already caved in. He called out, "Elder Thorn, are you in there?" A weak voice responded from within. "Help, I'm trapped." Valeron rushed into the cottage, navigating through fallen beams and scattered debris. He found Elder Thorn pinned beneath a heavy wooden beam, unable to move. "Hold on," Valeron said, assessing the situation. "I'm going to try to lift this." He gripped the beam, straining with all his might to lift it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, he felt a surge of strength flow through him. The rapier at his side hummed, and suddenly the beam felt lighter. With a final push, Valeron managed to lift it enough for Elder Thorn to crawl free. "Thank you, my boy," The elder wheezed as Valeron helped him to his feet. "I thought I was done for." "We're not safe yet," Valeron replied, supporting the old man as they made their way out of the ruined cottage. "We need to get to the forest." As they emerged, Valeron's heart sank. The dragon had moved, cutting off their direct path to the forest. It was engaged in a fierce battle with Aemon, who continued to hold it at bay with bursts of searing light. But Valeron could see that his father was tiring, each blast of energy coming slower and with less intensity. "We'll have to go around," Valeron said to Elder Thorn. "Can you make it?" The old man nodded grimly. "I may be old, but I'm not ready to be dragon food just yet." They began to skirt the edge of the village, staying close to what remained of the buildings for cover. Valeron's eyes darted constantly between their path and the ongoing battle, his heart pounding with fear for his father and the village. Suddenly, the dragon's head swung towards them, its onyx eyes locking onto Valeron once more. With a speed that belied its massive size, it lunged, jaws opening wide. Valeron saw the dragon coming, knew he couldn't outrun it. In that moment, his only thought was to protect Elder Thorn. He pushed the old man aside and turned to face the oncoming threat, drawing his rapier in one fluid motion. As the blade cleared its sheath, it erupted with a brilliant dark light, so intense it was almost blinding. The dragon recoiled, more surprised than hurt, its attack aborted. Valeron stood, rapier raised, its light pulsing in time with his racing heart. He felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced, as if the very essence of light itself was flowing through him. For a brief moment, dragon and elf regarded each other, a silent communication passing between them. Then, with a deafening roar, the dragon reared back, preparing to unleash its shadowy breath. Valeron, acting on instinct, drew in the very shadow around him and swung his rapier in a wide arc. A crescent of pure white burst from the blade, slicing through the air towards the dragon. But as it left the rapier, the light seemed to warp and twist, taking on a darker hue. By the time it reached the dragon, it was a sickly mix of light and shadow. The impact was catastrophic. The dragon howled in pain as the energy struck its scales, but the attack didn't stop there. The corrupted light ricocheted off the dragon, tearing through nearby buildings and sending shockwaves across the village square. Valeron watched in horror as his attempt to help caused even more destruction. "Valeron!" Aemon's voice cut through the chaos. "What are you doing?" But Valeron couldn't respond. The power coursing through him was overwhelming, beyond his control. The rapier in his hand vibrated violently, light and shadow swirling around the blade in a frenzied dance. The dragon, enraged by the attack, renewed its assault with even greater ferocity. It smashed through buildings, its tail sweeping away entire structures as if they were made of straw. Its roars shook the very ground, and gouts of flame erupted from its maw, setting the village ablaze. Aemon raced towards his son, golden light gathering in his palms. "Valeron, drop the sword! You can't control it!" But Valeron couldn't let go. The power had him in its grip, as surely as he gripped the rapier's hilt. He could feel it building, knew that another explosion of energy was imminent. "Father, I can't—" Valeron's words were cut short as another burst of corrupted light erupted from the blade, this one even more powerful than the last. Aemon, seeing the danger, did the only thing he could. He threw himself at Valeron, tackling him to the ground. As they fell, Aemon's hand closed around the rapier's hilt, just above Valeron's own grip. There was a blinding flash, a sensation of searing heat, and then nothing. The rapier went silent, the swirling energies dissipating in an instant. Valeron lay on the ground, gasping for breath, his father's weight pinning him down.
The sudden absence of power left him feeling hollow, drained. Aemon rolled off his son, the rapier now in his hand. Its blade was dull, lifeless. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. Valeron nodded weakly, unable to find words. The reality of what he had done, the destruction he had caused, was beginning to sink in. A thunderous roar reminded them that the danger was far from over. The dragon, momentarily forgotten in the chaos of Valeron's outburst, was circling back towards them. Aemon stood, placing himself between Valeron and the approaching beast. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. As the dragon descended, Aemon raised his hands once more. The air around him began to shimmer with heat, golden light coalescing into a shield that enveloped both him and Valeron. The dragon's flames washed over them, but Aemon's shield held firm. Valeron could feel the intense heat, could see the flames licking at the edges of the golden barrier, but they remained unharmed. When the assault subsided, Aemon went on the offensive. He thrust his hands forward, sending a concentrated beam of sunlight directly at the dragon's eyes. The creature shrieked, temporarily blinded, and veered off course. "In the face of despair," Aemon said to himself, his voice strained with effort, "I will be hope." His eyes glowed with the force of 1,000 suns, readying himself for what was next. Valeron looked around, truly seeing the extent of the devastation for the first time. Sproutvale, the only home he had ever known, lay in ruins. Fires raged unchecked, smoke billowing into the night sky. The cries of the injured and the terrified filled the air. And it was all his fault. "Father, I'm sorry," Valeron choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean to." "Not now." Aemon cut him off, his tone softening slightly. "We'll talk later. Right now I need you to run. Get to the forest, find Darian and the others, make sure everyone is safe." "But what about you?" Valeron protested. Aemon's eyes never left the circling dragon as he replied, "I'll hold it off. Buy you all some time to get clear." "I can't leave you." "You can, and you will," Aemon said firmly. "Run!" With a final anguished look at his father, Valeron turned and ran. Behind him he could hear the sounds of battle resuming, the dragon's roars, the sizzle of Aemon's attacks, the crash of falling debris. As he reached the tree line, Valeron paused to look back. Aemon stood alone in the ruined village square, a solitary figure wreathed in golden light. Above him, the dragon wheeled and dove, a creature of shadow and flame. In that moment, Valeron felt smaller and more helpless than he ever had before. His attempt to help had only made things worse, and now his father was fighting alone against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. With a heavy heart, Valeron plunged into the forest, praying that his father's strength would be enough to save them all from the dragon's wrath. End of preview.